Welcome to the Truthful Fake Podcast. If you find these matters interesting, please share, like, and subscribe. In this episode, let's explore how the US dollar ascended to its role as the world's reserve currency, and then see how fresh twists in tariffs and trade tensions may be reshaping its future. The story begins in the early 20th century, when the British pound sterling dominated global finance, backed by an empire spanning multiple continents. World War I, however, caused a seismic shift. The United States stepped in to supply the Allies with steel, food, and weaponry, and in exchange, huge shipments of gold flowed westward. By 1918, the U.S. had become the world's leading creditor nation, its gold reserves swelling to unprecedented levels. This transformation laid the groundwork for dramatic changes in the global monetary order. In 1944, delegates from 44 Allied nations convened in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, determined to craft a new system to stabilize the post-war economy. The result was to anchor the world's currencies to the U.S. dollar, which was itself redeemable in gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. Because Washington held the bulk of the planet's gold by then, the dollar emerged as the fulcrum of the new system. The British economist John Maynard Keynes famously argued for a global Bancor currency, but the U.S. delegation, led by Harry Dexter White, insisted on the dollar. This signaled the dawn of American financial leadership, casting the dollar as a bedrock for trade and reconstruction. In the 1960s, trouble began to brew. U.S. government spending ballooned due to the Vietnam War and expansive domestic programs, pushing large amounts of dollars overseas at a faster pace than the gold supply could match. Major trading partners, notably France under Charles de Gaulle, grew suspicious and began converting their dollar holdings into gold. As gold reserves dwindled, President Richard Nixon in 1971 announced that the United States would no longer redeem dollars for gold. This so-called Nixon shock severed the dollar's link to gold. Many thought the dollar might lose standing without a metallic anchor, yet a new system soon emerged. By 1974, Washington had forged an agreement with Saudi Arabia that all oil sales be transacted in dollars, with profits reinvested in U.S. Treasury bonds. Because every oil-importing country needed dollars, global demand for the currency remained robust despite the end of the gold standard. This arrangement strengthened the dollar's global role into the closing decades of the 20th century, and key events helped maintain its status. In 1985, the world's top economic powers gathered at the Plaza Hotel in New York to manage the dollar's surging value, which had been harming U.S. exports. Through joint currency interventions, the dollar was deliberately pushed lower, temporarily restoring some balance. Yet such manipulations also had far-reaching consequences, including Japan's subsequent asset bubble. Meanwhile, the petrodollar framework ensured that the value of oil and the flow of petrodollars back into U.S. markets tethered the global financial system to the greenback. Even the upheaval of the 2008 financial crisis ultimately strengthened its safe haven appeal, as panicked investors worldwide flocked to the stability of U.S. Treasuries. By late 2024, the dollar still made up about 57.8% of global reserves, down from 71% in 2000, but still a commanding share. While the euro held about 20% and the Chinese yuan just over 2%, the dollar's advantage lay in the vast size and liquidity of U.S. bond markets, as well as a relatively stable government. Potential challengers do exist, including China's push to internationalize the yuan and the rise of digital currencies, but no single competitor has yet assembled the trusted market depth to topple the dollar's reign. The dollar's primacy carries concrete benefits for the U.S. economy, and especially for consumers. Because global central banks and investors seek safety in U.S. treasuries, the American government can borrow money at lower interest rates than most other nations. This dynamic keeps borrowing costs, and, by extension, interest rates, relatively modest, fueling cheaper loans and buoying consumer spending. The high global demand for dollars also means that many imports, from electronics to clothing, remain relatively affordable. Yet these perks have a downside. A strong dollar can make American exports more expensive overseas, straining domestic manufacturing, with some U.S. factories shedding jobs as foreign buyers turn to cheaper alternatives. Thus, while consumer goods stay cheap, industrial workers sometimes bear the brunt, exacerbating income inequality. Trade policies add another layer of complexity. The Trump administration's tariffs, 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum, along with sweeping duties on Chinese goods, were intended to safeguard domestic industries. But tariffs can inadvertently strengthen the dollar by attracting investors hoping for better returns, which can undercut American exports. On top of that, China retaliated with tariffs on U.S. farm goods and various regulatory hurdles, reducing U.S. exports to China over a 5-year period. The European Union employs a more multifaceted strategy, blending classic tariffs with complex regulations and a value-added tax system. Oblique protectionist methods, such as long approval times for genetically modified crops, target pesticide restrictions, and bans on often seemingly arbitrarily singled-out substances used by foreign competitors, like titanium dioxide, can act as de facto trade barriers. Meanwhile, the VAT system, which taxes each stage of production but exempts exports, can give European companies an edge over U.S. firms that have no comparable tax rebates. A car exported from Europe may arrive at foreign ports tax-free, while an American car often has embedded tax costs that cannot be reclaimed. Although economists often assert that this is a neutral system, some manufacturers and analysts argue that it grants Europe an unfair price advantage in global markets. Beyond trade considerations, the U.S. military's global footprint bolsters confidence in the dollar. With bases in dozens of countries and a fleet that keeps shipping lanes secure, the United States acts as a linchpin of global stability, giving the U.S. dollar an added boost during tumultuous times. Having the world's primary reserve currency also grants Washington formidable leverage. Sanctions on countries like Russia or Iran can cut them off from U.S. financial networks, compelling compliance without firing a shot. The dollar thus underwrites American power, and American power underwrites the dollar, forming a self-reinforcing cycle. Turning back to China, we see a deliberate challenge to the dollar's supremacy. By 2025, China's yuan covered more than half of its own international trade transactions, a significant leap from just a decade earlier. Bilateral currency swaps with dozens of nations allow Chinese firms and their foreign partners to bypass the dollar entirely. China's Colossal Belt and Road Initiative further entrenches yuan use by tying infrastructure investments to Chinese supply chains. Additionally, the rollout of the digital yuan, tested in numerous Chinese cities, envisions a world where transactions can occur without recourse to U.S.-dominated financial channels. Yet hurdles remain. China Communist Party's pervasive capital controls deter many investors, and the yuan's share of global reserves, while slowly inching up, remains modest. The yuan's ascent may prove to be a long game that plays out over decades, or it may just reverse course if China's economy falters. Let's touch on the Biden era and the tariffs of 2024 to 2025. While some expected an easing of trade tensions with China, the Biden administration, finding bipartisan support for a hardline stance, kept and even expanded tariffs on strategic goods from electric vehicles to semiconductors. Washington also imposed new export controls on critical technologies like advanced chipmaking tools. China responded with its own reprisals, including stepped-up tariffs, tight restrictions on rare earth elements, and regulatory pressure against U.S. businesses operating on Chinese soil. Both sides took disputes to the World Trade Organization, though the WTO's capacity to enforce rulings against major powers has become severely limited. These economic sparks flew against a backdrop of shifting alliances. China advanced its influence through the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, an enormous trade bloc that excludes the United States. The U.S., in turn, redoubled efforts to strengthen ties with allies in the Indo-Pacific and Europe, forging frameworks like the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum and the Trade and Technology Council with the EU. Meanwhile, nations across Asia, Africa, and Latin America weighed how best to navigate an era of intensifying U.S.-China rivalry. In addition, the global march of digital currencies, particularly China's state-backed digital yuan, introduces a new variable. Over the past few years, digital platforms have demonstrated that cross-border transactions can be settled in seconds, potentially sidestepping the SWIFT system and lessening dependence on the U.S. dollar. China's digital currency already processes a high volume of domestic payments, and pilot projects show promise for broader adoption in Belt and Road partner countries. Yet trust, transparency, and user-friendly regulation remain vital for any currency aspiring to displace the dollar. And if anything, China is currently tightening its grip on the economy. On the other hand, the Federal Reserve has explored a digital dollar, but so far it has moved cautiously, not wanting to disrupt the world's most widely used currency without fully understanding the implications. Against this changing backdrop, the U.S. dollar remains perched at the center of the international financial system. Its heft confers privileges that keep borrowing costs low and trade finance flowing, yet it also exposes fissures. Those who work in export industries feel the pinch of a strong dollar, which can heighten competition from cheaper foreign goods. Some countries bristle at Washington's ability to use sanctions as a financial weapon. Incremental steps toward de-dollarization have cropped up in multiple corners of the globe, from central banks diversifying reserves to bilateral deals settled in other currencies. Even so, no single contender matches the depth, liquidity, and confidence that the dollar has earned over many decades. Thus, the dollar's supremacy endures for now, but it does so under a steady drip of challenges: trade wars, digital currency experiments, and shifting geopolitical alliances. Washington's renewed tariffs on China and Beijing's robust countermoves highlight the power of an entrenched currency system, but also hint at its possible vulnerabilities. History shows that reserve currencies rarely last forever, but neither do they vanish overnight. The world finds itself in a slow, high-stakes dance, where the U.S. dollar still calls the tune, but others are beginning to hum a different melody. In the end, the dollar story, which started in wartime necessity, advanced through Bretton Woods, escaped the gold standard, found new footing in the petrodollar era, and now weathers intensifying competition, remains an unfolding narrative. It's a saga of global leadership, ambition, and the subtle economic forces that bind nations together. As 2025 rolls on, questions swirl about how long the greenback can maintain its perch and whether China's ambitions will ultimately bring about a more multipolar currency regime. Only time will deliver the final verdict, but for now, the U.S. dollar continues to wield its considerable influence, and it remains an emblem of American power in a world that grows more contested by the day. I hope that you enjoyed this overview. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.